Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone. Good morning, everyone. And just before starting, I'd like to thank Christina and Emil for inviting me, and not only to invite me to speak today, but also to take part in the organizing committee. It's been a really great experience, and I feel so humble and so happy to be here when we all meet in person. So actually, people exist. We still have a third dimension, and I'm really grateful for that. Before starting, I should maybe disclose that I'm not a lab director. I'm an academic, with everything that it means. So I'm not here to give, a lecture. I'm not here to give you answers, solutions, already made solutions. If it raises just a few questions that people can talk between themselves and have some ideas for the future, I think that's already a very positive outcome. So, forensic crisis. So we've heard that word or that term for a number of years. Forensic science is a bit like this traffic jam here. We've heard a lot of problems that have been identified, potential solutions. Quite often the solutions are counteracting. So there has been continuous statement and warnings about a crisis in forensic science. And I'm not going to go back through history here, but it's been raised from within and from outside forensic science. And we had a few papers. It's just a snippet, so I don't mean to be exhaustive here. And it framed a lot of the actions of the labs around the world for a number of years. And it created a sort of echo chamber. And by doing that, the risk is we may have missed something much more dramatic that happened in our society in the last 5 to 10 years. So during that time, we had dramatic changes. So where forensic science may have a contribution not only to the traditional crime solving and so on, but we've seen dramatic changes in climate leading to big environmental issues. We've seen forensic science having the opportunity to contribute to human rights. We've seen, obviously, digital transformation, and I'll talk about that later. Security at large, including cybersecurity. In Europe, there's a war going on next door, so to speak. And there are a lot of things where forensic science could contribute or is expected to contribute. I mean, I've heard the term crowdsourcing of intelligence and so on. So really, really interesting. And the virus. So the virus really changed our life for the last 2 years. And a lot of things that happened in the fight of the pandemic was very analogous to what we could do in forensic science. We even used the term contact tracing. In Australia in the last 2 years, something that would have never happened before, policing efforts have been used to support public health policy. Who would have imagined that? So really, all these big themes, and it's not exhaustive, are interconnected, and it increased the potential to use forensic science, and sometimes forensic science is expected to contribute to part of the solutions. The issue there is that the kind of models we deal with in forensic science make that shift very, very difficult. It's very difficult to have a forward thinking, for example, about environmental questions. It's often left to labs who are very specialized, and policymakers in general still talk about security, legal challenges, and all that. So this overall situation is very challenging. And because of that, it challenges the traditional forensic science laboratory. And we ought to ask these questions. Is the forensic science laboratory, and we could spend probably the whole plenary to talk about what we mean by forensic science laboratory, but that's a generic term. Is it becoming less relevant or irrelevant given all these challenges? Should we take that as an opportunity to reimagine ourselves? What we could do with forensic science. And Anna mentioned this notion of marketing. I don't necessarily like the term marketing, but you get it. What is the value proposition of the forensic science laboratory today and in the future. So as I mentioned, I don't have all the answers, but hopefully I can put some points for discussions later. So let's start with this paradox we are in forensic science. And we all know that we optimize system for the provision of evidence in court. And we know that in most jurisdictions, only a very small part of the traces end up in court. So immediately we can see that if we optimize something for something that happened very rarely, we may be in trouble. Another thing that is interesting to see, when we talk about this apparent crisis, with the ENS report, PCAS and all that, it's really about these themes, miscarriage of justice, bias, all these topics. And these topics really are, as I mentioned, court-focused. Now, when we look at more broad applications of forensic science, and really when we hear successes in forensic science, it's all these themes here, from crime scene to combating crime, the new technology, cold cases, high-profile cases, and so on. And here we are in the realm of investigation and security. So there is a bit of a question here. And there is this paradox because large labs and networks actually explicitly talk about fight crime or talk about criminal phenomena and seem to accept that broader definition. However, they are still largely in a model that align itself with what you have on the left-hand side of the slide here. And this is a paradox, and this is an issue. More generally, the contribution of the forensic science lab to the broad strategy is often poorly expressed. So I was very interested to read the NFC Vision 2030 document, and there is a mention of migration challenges. And this is really, really interesting. But it also begs the question, and it's not the criticism, it's just to think a bit, a bit forward thinking. What would be the value proposition of a forensic lab to be involved in cases like that as opposed to a lot of other entities? So if you are the authorities, why would you go to the forensic lab instead of going to another provider? So some people provide the solution as a technology solution, because actually it's easier to think about technology and develop technology than think about these much broader challenges. And to some extent, it's almost a federating thing that shouldn't be, but is there. And the problem there is then we tend to look at the lab as a technology provider. So if we look at the lab as just a technology provider, it starts to be more difficult to reconnect with these sort of big challenges of society I mentioned before. So really the question is, do we want to expand? Should we? And it's not to me to answer. As I mentioned, I'm not a lab director, but these are the very interesting questions. So if you're interested in these sort of topics about use of technology as opposed to the purpose of what we are doing, Celine Weierman and Sheila Willis will present this afternoon in the management track. Now, talking about technology, there is this statement in Jim Fraser's book that I found very interesting. So it may be controversial, but I think it illustrates this point that there are risks when we just use technology for the sake of it. We have little sense of purpose. And just the fact of using technology may mean that we just progress, which is not really that. So what could technology do? So this is a revised slide that we've used a number of times in a lot of different presentations, which shows the typical funnel from when an offense is made to when the evidence is presented, and we see the potential value of traces, and we see the traces that are used for investigation and traces that are used for evaluation. And it's quite clear that the value in a process like that is when we are very close to the offense. And with fingerprints, we do that pretty well in general. You know, there are a lot of techniques that can be used in the scene. There are a lot of method of capturing fingerprint, you know, with live scan technology and so on. There was a case in Australia a few years ago where the finger mark could be identified at the scene. They could send a patrol to the person of interest place, and they just catch him while he was coming back from committing the offense with a lot of stolen goods in the boot. So that's very, very effective. The problem we have with the traditional lab is a lot of analyses are very slow and are very geared towards the right-hand side of that graph. And obviously what we could try to do, and people have started to do that, of course, is to try to move this analysis closer to the offense, which is where technology can help. And there is nothing new here. Absolutely nothing new in terms of the concept. You know, everyone knows the good breath testing, random breath testing we have in many, many countries. So we tend to accept that we can do that at the side of the road, that we don't have to go to hospital to get a blood sample taken and all analysis in the lab. Now, obviously, there are changes depending on jurisdictions, legislations, and all that, but it's kind of accepted. More recently, we've seen portable Raman systems that are used for, you know, quick drug analysis. And here you've got the example of live scan technology, so very, very quick, fast, in-field capture of fingerprints in that case. So modern technology here offers an option for decentralization of forensic services. But it also makes the analysis a commodity, so which is a double-edged sword. So as usual, there are challenges and opportunities when we deal with things like that. The first thing to realize, this movement of decentralization, and especially miniaturization of technology and going to the scene, it's irreversible. It's happening. The technology is moving there. So it may be a lost battle trying to fight that. It brings the lab to the scene, which is an old mantra that we've heard for many, many years. It allows trace exploitation in real time, or almost real time, or very fast, whatever term you want to use. With modern technology, you can have a quick automatic geolocalization and time stamping, which is all very, very interesting, very effective. Fast transmission of the results. The data is quickly usable by the police or the authorities. And the specimens are not systematically sent to the laboratory. So we don't flood the laboratory with a lot of specimens that are not relevant or not useful, don't hold the information you would like. But again, this is a double-edged sword. Because if the laboratory has a business model which is based on these high volume, high throughput cases, they will be in trouble. And that forensic capability could be applied in various contexts. Now, there are challenges here. The first one is it puts all this analysis out of the control of the forensic laboratory. And this is especially a more critical challenge for laboratories who have abandoned the crime scene. It makes use of the technology by non-specialists, so that's a risk. There is a risk of isolating each situation, so every situation will be taken separately, so we would lose, the join between all the dots. The laboratory loses access to the trace, and there is a weak knowledge exchange between laboratory and field. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but these are the risks. So really, it's a challenge for the forensic lab positioning. And as I mentioned, especially for a lab that has abandoned crime scene. So when we talk about technology and use of new technology, I think we always have to think about what's the main purpose? What are we trying to do by using this technology? What's the purpose of the technology? What does the result mean? Which is true for any forensic analysis, but especially for that. And what do we do with the data? Because potentially we generate heaps more data with this technology. And what do we do with that? And it's a challenge in itself. If you are interested in this sort of a field portable technology, a new way of doing forensic analysis in that theme, I would recommend these presentations, and especially the keynote by Pierre Seva tomorrow morning at 9:30. A last word about these technologies and this paradigm. I think one thing which is quite interesting, quite often when we have technology vendors proposing technology, the idea is to use the technology as we would do in a lab. Too often we think that we are using the technology for the main purpose as we use the lab. Well, actually, we should try to think about that's an opportunity to do things completely differently, not just to do a portable GC analysis and do exactly the same thing as you would do in the lab. Now, talking about technology, probably the most dramatic changes in technology, I think you all agree, and I know we will have a few plenary presentations about that during the week, including by Owen Casey, is digital transformation. So it's the rise of digital traces and the rise of the digital forensics community. So I'm not going to spend time explaining, how it changed our life. Most of us have a smartphone. It completely changed our life during the pandemic when we had, I don't know how it was in Sweden. I think it was a bit, more relaxed. But at least in Australia, it was, very strict in terms of having your smartphone and checking in, checking out all the time and things like that. So these digital transformations, they facilitate the traceability of people and behavior. And these digital traces can be used to make inference about a lot of things, including location, identity, chronologies, relationship between relevant entities. And digital traces can provide rapid resolutions, such as exonerating the innocent, motivating confessions from offenders, and so on. And the faster we do this, the better it is for victims, the accused, and the criminal justice overall. However, as I'll spend some time, in a moment, it creates a lot of challenges because of the volume of the data, the speed the data is coming in, and so on. So we'll spend some time about that in a minute. At that stage, it's probably timely to talk briefly about a paper we published with Owen Casey and Olivier Ribot a couple of years ago about the Kodak syndrome, or the risk for forensic science to suffer from the Kodak syndrome. So you all know what happened to Kodak. They were a very successful photography company, and they invented digital photography, but they essentially committed suicide because they didn't really realize what they had invented. And they continued using the same business model based on printing photos. They didn't realize that people in 2020 would use Instagram to share photos, and very few people would print photos in everyday life. So from a very comprehensive professional service in the 1900s, then it became some kind of a commodity, democratized, where people were just asking to print what they wanted, the good old 1-hour photo lab. And then in 2022, a very chaotic self-service of images sharing with a lot of algorithms and all done in real time. So you see where it's going. We have to think about whether forensic science or the forensic lab is a risk to fall in something like that, because it was a very full service in the beginning. Then at some stage it became a very dictated, test-based approach. This is, and people would use sample. If Frank is in the room, he will probably hit the roof, but it's a specimen. So people would give a specimen, they would say, give me the result, I want this test. So that would be the analogous to the middle photo. And now we're moving towards the right of the slide, so we have to think very, very carefully about where our value proposition is. So in other words, maybe there are cases where we can bypass the forensic lab, and that's facilitated by digital transformation. And actually, that already happens. That happened most notoriously with the famous forensic genetic genealogy space. So I think Christophe yesterday mentioned this function creep, when data and databases are built for one purpose and then they are used for another purpose, and this creates some ethical and legal challenges. But the reality is that in some jurisdictions, that's allowed. People manage to compare DNA profiles to DNA profiles that had been uploaded by the general public to these ancestry-type websites. So in a case like that, why do you need a forensic laboratory? It can go straight from the investigation to the website. You need a technical lab who can do the profiling, but that's it. There is no value proposition. There is no forensic value proposition in the lab. So that's an interesting topic to think about. So if you're interested in that space, there are a few presentations, including from Australia, where Alison sees later this morning. One thing that with technology and especially digital transformation, we've seen over the years is this rapid exponential graph showing how technologies are invented faster and faster, and they are used more and more, and we create all this huge amount of data. And we can't catch up, we can't follow. It's going too fast. And there is this 5V dimensions. There are 5 dimensions. So the volume of the data, the variety, the velocity, and the value of veracity. It's all going at the same time. So we're in a 5-dimension space, and a human brain has difficulties to even imagine how to deal with this. So I'm sure there are people working with algorithms and AI in the room. They may have a solution, but I would say an average brain like myself, they have difficulty to find this, big 5 dimensions. Just to give just a little idea, I had some data from the AFP, and I think Sarah Benson, our chief forensic scientist in Canberra, just in one dimension. Digital traces are used by the AFP in 94% of investigations, and the average data seizures is currently the equivalent of more than 300 average-size iPhones. Now, the digital forensic data holding, and that was last year, so I'm sure that's much more now, is the equivalent of more than 30,000 average-size iPhones. So only one dimension. So as you can see, we have a bit of a problem there, because traces are very diverse. Physical, digital, all sorts of traces. And they are coming with more speed, in bigger volume or size. Data management becomes an issue. We heard yesterday we have to consider ethical consideration, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. We want to use this data for investigation, for court. We've got a very heavy, bureaucratic quality management system in place. In the same time, we want to use that, and there is a high demand to use this data for intelligence and also non-judicial pathways, as I mentioned, with these sort of big changes in society. So it's like a very difficult problem. So at that stage, I'll give you this little tale. So it's not an ad for Qantas. It's not an ad to come to the IAFS conference next year. It's just a little tale about a story that happened in a cockpit. The flight QF32, the 4th of November, 2010. It's an A380. A few minutes after taking off in Singapore, one of the engines blew out. Just big hole in the fuselage. They lost one engine. They lost the power. They lost hydraulics. It was a big nightmare in the cockpit. And they were receiving error messages after error messages after error messages. They couldn't keep up. So they had to find a solution. And this is the pilot, Richard de Crespigny, who wrote a book after that, as you can imagine. And I'll let you read his points here. And I think you'll see, the analogy with where we are in forensic science. I find quite interesting when he said we are chasing a computer program instead of, remembering that actually we are here to fly a plane. And also, when it was so difficult, the only way to make sense was to go back to basics. And then it started to be easy. And think about what's working, not what's not working. So let's go back quickly to the basics. So it's why in recent years there has been this resurgence of discussions and papers and presentations around more fundamental issues around forensic science. So very quickly, we all know the basics starts from a problem. It's all about problem solving. And usually there is a context. There are traces left in that context. Quite often there is a scene, sometimes there is no scene. Quite often there is a lab analyzing the traces, and then we have experts who end up giving evidence in court. Now, the things which are very interesting here, when we talk uncertainties, what's less controlled? Obviously, it's the beginning of the process and the end of the process. So the middle bit, like Peter de Forest would call that the middle bit of the forensic continuum, is easy. And it's the most controlled part. And interestingly, it's the part that we always go back to put more control to increase the quality of what we are doing. Well, actually, the pressure points, or the weakest links, if you want, is around the trace generation, the trace transfer, persistent degradation, knowing everything about the trace, and the meaning, and how we transmit this information to various stakeholders. So that gives a clue about where our value proposition is in forensic science. It's around these two things. It's really around reconnecting to the questions, reconnecting to the traces. So we have to remember that. And if you are interested in these sort of discussions, so there is this paper published recently by Frank Crispino and co-authors around another paradigm for forensic science. Another thing that I thought would be interesting to show you this morning is highlighting the multi-purpose of forensic science. Forensic science has several purposes. And everything starts from a problem and the questions, and then we've got the traces. And these traces can be used for investigation, and we know it's to reconstruct the case. They can be used for court. So court purposes is, simplistically said, is, you want to find the offender guilty and exonerate the innocent. And more recently, to have a multi-case approach and look at intelligence prevention. So it's difficult to be effective across all these purposes without some kind of unity. And seriality and change of scale change a lot of things. So really the key point here is that we need to reconnect with the purposes in forensic science. And that will help to assist some of the challenges we have. If you are interested in that, we published a paper with Sheila Willis and Selene Werman recently. So shifting from means to purpose. It's not all about the methods. It's really about the purpose. Why are we doing what we are doing? And these fundamental questions are becoming more and more important, but they are not new. Someone like Paul Kirk mentioned, that statement in 1963. And I always say we are a bit like this little guy on the seesaw, because we are a small group, a small community, and we haven't really well defined our fundamental principles, what we do, and so on. So each time there is another group coming, they are much bigger. They look at the problems through their lens, not through the forensic science lens, and it tilts, the power. And this is not only academic, because how can we teach research and even practice something we don't really know what it's all about, and we don't know the principles. And that leads to the Sine Declaration. So you may have heard about that declaration. That was something we were meant to do at IAFS 2020 that never existed because of the pandemic. And it's just an exercise where we tried to shift the thinking and try to tease out the tenets, the principles of forensic science, and including a definition. So there were a lot of people involved in that, plus a lot of people who are mentioned here because they indirectly contributed to the declaration. So that leads to one question. Are you familiar with the Sine Declaration? So you can take your app and answer that. That will be very helpful to all of us in the Sine Declaration group, because we did a similar exercise with people who went to the workshop yesterday, but we had some 30-odd responses. So the statisticians out there will probably tell you that it's not really significant. Interesting. So we've got approximately half of the people who have somehow heard about it, from very, very well aware to a bit, or now a bit more that haven't heard about it. Okay, so I think we can stop. That's very, very useful. And so if you don't know about it, please feel free to get the paper. I'm happy to talk about that with all my colleagues. So as I mentioned, you've got here in a nutshell, don't have time to go through all that, but you've got the definition and you've got the various principles. And if you are interested, you can spend 2 hours watching a video when we launched the declaration last year. So let's go through a few case studies, trying to make sense about what I mentioned this morning. So here, it's about trying to reconnect with a purpose and a strategy. And we're in a situation where we have rapid tests for cannabis. There is a change of legislation, and there are some rapid tests that can be done at the scene to decide whether the cannabis is legal or not legal. So that's done on a case-by-case basis. It's destructive. And we could ask the question, what's the role of the forensic lab in that? We can go a bit further. It's the use of Raman technology, and that's something that New South Wales did in a few years, and they're still doing it, as far as I understand. They changed the legislation. If people are arrested with just a very small amount of illicit drugs, so non-trafficable amount, a Raman test is enough to provide or to give an infringement penalty. If the defendant challenged that, then it will go to the lab, and it will go to court, and if the result is confirmed, all the cost will be to the defendant. So what did happen, you think? Of course, people know what they consume. So it completely freed up the lab to do other things, more important, more interesting, than just high volume of something which is not necessarily critical in the big scheme of things. Then we can go to the next step. And this is something that Pierre Seva's group is doing at the University of Lausanne, where they've developed near-infrared field portable technology, where you can get, in 5 seconds, you can get a result. You can analyze some drug samples. You can have, it's linked to an architecture in the cloud. You can do things like, type the cannabis, get the purity of some cocaine, for example, and so on. And all that feeds a real-time database. So here the technology is used more intelligently. So we collect the information on the illicit market almost in real time. It's non-destructive. So that knowledge management allows proactive policing. And then we could go to the next step, which is what my colleague Marie Moralato and people in Lausanne as well, like Quentin Rossi and others, have developed. So it's all problem-oriented approach. So where here's the illicit drug problem in the middle, and it's all about detection, monitoring, and emerging. And you need to get information from a lot of different sources. And then you can combine all that to understand the problem better, because one picture, one source will not give you the full picture. Now, you can ask the question, what part of these sort of topics a forensic lab could be engaged in? If you are just doing the lab analysis and not interested in some of the other things, you are missing a lot of opportunity for forensic science to contribute. If you're interested in that, there is a talk by Mari Morlaito on Thursday afternoon. And this is kind of a summary, quite complex, what we had in the paper with Owen, which shows the value of the lab. So we put this sort of architecture of the lab with a lot of all the decentralized services and all the different stakeholders. So it shows the value of the lab in the knowledge management in the middle. So where the lab is really a central repository of knowledge through a core memory, so that can do quick link to crime analysis, and there is an R&D capability to tackle emerging problems, threats, and study emerging technologies. And that's, you may say, oh, it's all very utopic, but actually not, because I should thank Simon Walsh for providing this slide, which demonstrates the AFP's consultancy model, which delivered very, very positive outcomes, where here on the right-hand side, you see the various types of crime and the various domains where that can be used. And there is an ongoing consultation between operational members and a forensic officer. And there are interdisciplinary experts that engage to align with forensic capabilities to the problem at hand. So this is a very good system that provided a very positive outcome for the AFP. So if you are interested in something like that, just go and see the presentation by Simon on Tuesday afternoon. So the case for a forensic lab, you've got a summary here. So we've got legitimacy, repository of forensic knowledge and expertise, big data with crime analysis potential, privacy safeguard versus collection. The complex cases can still be done by the lab. The good lab has R&D capability, and a lab has administrative acumen. So, to sum up, we are at a situation of almost rupture. There is a rupture that has been caused by the big changes in social, in society, big changes with digital transformation, and so on. And we have to rethink where our value proposition is in terms of a forensic lab and forensic science in general. And the key aspects is, we should take a more central role of what's going on. We should reconnect with problem solving. We should reconnect with a purpose. We should have a sense of purpose of what we're doing. That should rely on sound forensic science principles. We should remember that, and we should try to take the lab out of the laboratory, and we should try to expand the lab beyond courts. Otherwise, we lose opportunities of things that are happening anyway. A lot of these are linked to the creation and transfer of knowledge and intelligence. And it really relies on a very sound forensic science culture, and a forensic science culture that has to be more supported and more developed in the future. And you've got here on the right-hand side a short diagram showing you what we mean. We're putting the forensic science fundamentals in the core, and the disciplines are all porous around, and not putting the methods, the standards at the core of the system. Little cautionary tale that we put in our paper a couple of years ago. We have to be very, very careful, because if we don't manage that properly, that may create a loss of opportunities and all sorts of issues in now everyday business. So I'd like to thank NFC. I'd like to thank the European Academy, and especially Christina and Emil for inviting me. That's a really, really great experience, and I'm very glad to be here today. All my forensic science friends and colleagues, you've got my details if you are interested in contacting me. And don't forget, next year, in 2023, we've got IAFs. Hopefully there won't be any pandemic. and we welcome you there, and we'll talk a lot about these topics in the lead up to that IAFS meeting. Thank you.